What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Earlier in the week, I did an episode on Green Bay's biggest weaknesses on their current roster and the current state of their team. So I thought it was only fair that I came back and did their biggest strengths. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. And this isn't just looking specifically at their roster and their 53 and being like, here's their strengths or the current state of the team, but also some things that they have organizationally. Just like I mentioned, the mystique of Lambeau Field as one of their weaknesses. And right now it's just not the same as what it used to be. There's going to be some things in this episode that I do think are organizational strengths. And as we go through this transition time frame in Green Bay and sort of go from a team that is off of back-to-back Hall of Fame quarterbacks to a little bit more of an unknown, you want that steadiness, you want that balance, and you want a franchise that knows how to win. You want a franchise that can hopefully use some of the strengths and inherent advantages that they have as an organization to get them through some of these transition times and hopefully get them back into prominence sooner rather than later. So some of this is going to be roster stuff. Some of this is going to be organizational stuff. We'll go through all of it, but there's 10 things that I think are currently strengths for Green Bay in no particular order. But let's start with the left side of the Packers offensive line. Now, a couple caveats right away, even with this one. The first one is health is a major issue here, right? If David Bakhtiari has any sort of setback with his leg, this goes out the window. Same thing with Elton Jenkins. Pre-ACL injury, he was phenomenal, had the ACL, came back last year, played right tackle, looked terrible, moved back to left guard, looked much, much better. But I think there's a level to which Elton Jenkins can still get to that's even higher than what he played at, even pre-ACL injury. But on the surface, on paper, David Bakhtiari, Elton Jenkins, left tackle, left guard, has the ability to be the best left side of any offensive line in the NFL. Bakhtiari, top 3 offensive tackle. Elton Jenkins, probably top 5 to 10 at worst guard. And you've got those two guys playing next to each other on the same offensive line. For a quarterback who's in his first year as a starter, to have your blind side protected by Bakhtiari and Jenkins, that is a huge advantage. And there is another caveat here as well, and that's if things go wrong at center with Josh Myers, maybe they don't feel comfortable with Zach Tom doing that job. There is a world in which Elton Jenkins maybe moves back to center. We know Elton can get moved to any spot at any moment, so that's always a possibility as well. But as of right now, if everything stays as is, and if both players can stay healthy, Bakhtiari, Jenkins, left tackle, left guard should be a dominant left side. And that's not just for Jordan Love. When Green Bay was going really, really well in 2020, running the football, Aaron Jones, Bakhtiari, Elton Jenkins, Corey Linsley, left to right, that left side they could run behind all day long. And they still need to develop that center. Hopefully Josh Myers can take a step this year. Maybe it can be Zach Tom. We'll see. But that left side has the ability to be really, really good. And hopefully not only does that help the blind side for Jordan Love, but now you have a side that you can run against or run behind more consistently this upcoming season. So number 1, left side of the offensive line. Number 2 is something that I actually went over in the weaknesses category, and that's their youth. Now, in the weaknesses, or what I talked about earlier in the week, I mentioned inexperience, right? And just not having experience at some key positions, obviously receiver, tight end, quarterback, those sort of things. Like that, there's going to be some bumps in the road along the way and some volatility because they don't have some of the experience at some of those key positions, obviously quarterback being the big one. However, this is a young man's game. They only have 4 players over the age of 28. They're building this team the right way with youth. They're not just bringing in, some, random 35-year-old veterans to fill in a spot here or there. They're going with younger players. They had 13 draft picks this year. They had 3 players taken in the top 35 of last year's draft and another 11 draft picks last year, not to mention Bo Melton and Luke Tenuta, who were also drafted last year, who they were able to pick up. Caleb Jones was an undrafted free agent they kept. So they have a ton of first and second year players on this team. They've got a full undrafted free agent class. There's going to be some issues with that, but they also have some really fun, exciting youth on this roster. And I think that youth, that playmaking, that exuberance, I think you're going to see that. And I think maybe not translating into wins this year, but I think overall the direction that they took and the youth and the just excitement of this roster, I do think is ultimately going to be a strength for Green Bay moving forward. May just not realize it with wins in 2023. Number 3 is the edge rotation once Rashawn Gary is back healthy. And yes, that is a little bit of an asterisk as well, but when healthy, if Green Bay can rotate at their edge position, Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith, Luke Van Ness, and Kingsley Enagbare, that's as close as it gets to a picture perfect 4-man edge rotation. Now, Philly knows some things about edge rotations, and they've got that thing mastered with their defensive front, but not too shabby to have Gary, Preston, Van Ness, and Inigbare as your rotational 4. Not to mention a Justin Hollins who you bring back. They get, Brenton Cox is an undrafted free agent who's an interesting player. So I do think that they have more depth in their edge rusher position than they've had in a very long time. And you really like the idea that those front 4 of Gary, Preston, Van Ness, and Inigbare could be wreaking havoc along a offensive tackle group throughout the entirety of the game with bringing different flavors of edge rusher. We know what Rashawn wants to do. He wants to convert speed to power, bull rush, get to the quarterback. Van Ness is going to be a similar type of player, but has a few different nuances that he can bring. Preston Smith, more of a technician at the position at this point. And Inigbare, a little bit of a quicker, faster edge rusher, a little bit more undersized, but he brings a variety of moves to the table as an edge rusher. 4 different players that can bring all different things. And on one down, they can all play left or right. You could go against Rashawn Gary the first play, and then Inigbare, a totally different player. Then Van Ness is going to come at you, and then all of a sudden Preston Smith, the vet, comes at you. You could see 4 totally different edge rushers on 4 different plays, and that is a lot for an offensive tackle to take in. And because they all bring something different, you can kind of match them up against the offensive tackle that maybe struggles against the thing that they do well. If you've got a bigger offensive tackle that maybe struggles with speed and shiftiness a little bit more, all right, let's see if Kingsley Inigbare can play across from them. You've got a more of an undersized tackle that struggles with players converting speed to power. All right, let's see if Rashawn Gary or Lucas Van Ness can work over him. You've got maybe a young, inexperienced offensive tackle that doesn't know all the tricks of the trade yet. All right, let Preston Smith work over that guy. He's going to figure that out very, very quick. So I think there's some different flavors that they have there. And I'm really excited about this edge position, especially once Rashawn Gary comes back from injury. Next up is yards after the catch and just playmaking ability at the weapons positions. This is something that Green Bay had been dreadfully lacking. And I get that Green Bay and this Matt LaFleur system wanted players that could block, and everyone's doing their 111th and doing their part, and everyone's setting everyone else up for success. That sounds great. But at some point in time, your playmakers need to make plays. Spoiler alert. And I love Allen Lazard. I think he's a really good wide receiver. But as a true playmaker, run after the catch guy, he was limited. Randall Cobb at this stage of his career, as a run after the catch guy, true playmaker, he was limited. You had Mercedes Lewis. Love Mercedes Lewis. Love Mercedes Lewis to death. He's a 6th offensive lineman, shadowing as a tight end, or moonlighting as a tight end, I should say. So that's not going to be a playmaker. Robert Tonyan was not a playmaker. AJ Dillon, I'm so sorry, but not a playmaker. You can utilize him, and there's ways that you can use him, but not a big time playmaker, not a big time, yards after contact guy, not going to run a 4.3 40 and run away from defenses. At some point, your offense needs to have players who can make plays at your weapon positions. Now they've got a Christian Watson. They've got a 4.3 40 guy in Jaden Reed. Aaron Jones is still a playmaker. They get 2 guys in Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave, who I think are going to be much more dynamic after the catch than guys like Robert Tonyan and Mercedes Lewis were. I still think Romeo Doubs has some playmaking ability. That is a much more well-rounded. Even in Samori Touré's limited time, he gets a big touchdown pass a season ago. So this is a wide receiver group that, in my opinion, and a weapons group, tight end, running back, that has much more playmaking ability than what they've had in the past. And I think that's going to be something that Matt LaFleur, Jordan Love, and this offense is going to be able to utilize. And you're going to see a difference in team speed and team playmaking in 2023. Number 5 is Keyshawn Nixon. Just simply put, Keyshawn Nixon. Green Bay found their returner, a first-team All-Pro returner. In no way, shape, or form do I think that was a fluke. I think this is a big-time returner. He showed it over and over and over a season ago. He's got great vision. He's got great acceleration. As a kick returner, he knows exactly how to hit the hole, how to set up his blocks, how to set up defenders, explode through it, get upfield. It's nothing too shake and bake. It's not dancing around and doing stuff as a kick returner you can't do. You've got to be able to get the ball, run with acceleration, set your blockers up, set up the defense for the special teams tackling group, the coverage unit for failure, make your cut, go, and be gone. He did a phenomenal job of that. As a punt returner, he showed a little bit more of that shiftiness, but also plant your foot, get upfield, get those yards, make your explosive plays. He had all of it. And I think that's going to continue. And when you have a big-time playmaker as a returner, that changes the calculus for your special teams. It changes the calculus for your offense. It changes the calculus for how teams play against you. That changes a lot of things for Green Bay. They're going to win a lot of field position battles because of Keyshawn Nixon. He's going to put points on the board for them just based on his explosivity as a returner. I love Keyshawn, and I think this is a real strength of the team, and I'm so happy they were able to bring him back in 2023. Number 6, this might sound, a little bit I don't know, maybe even ridiculous, but their schedule, they have a very easy schedule this year. This is not a team, this is not a schedule that is filled with a bunch of top end quarterbacks. It just isn't. Go look at it. They don't face a top end quarterback until the second half of the season. Like, this is an NFC North that they can win. This is an NFC that is not very good at the moment. Their schedule, how it plays out with no long road trips, extremely limited travel, no real rough back-to-backs where you're going East Coast to West Coast. They win the rest advantage more often than not. Really, the only really bad one is against the Giants, where the Giants have their bye week beforehand. There's only one game on the schedule, in my opinion, the Chiefs game, that you're really looking at it where like, all right, that's going to be a really hard one to win. Even that one, you play at home and you have a rest advantage going into that game. So this schedule stacks up very, very well for Green Bay. Now, you don't win just based off of schedule, and you can lose to any team, and we'll see. Maybe a lot of these teams that they face are better in 2023 than they were in the past. That can happen. But overall, you look how this schedule is put together, who they face, the quarterbacks they play, all those things. It is not a daunting schedule. And a lot of teams are going to look at Green Bay on their schedule and say, oh, we can win that game. And they're not wrong. And until Green Bay proves that they can go out and win a majority of their games, teams are going to look at Green Bay and say that's a winnable game. So Green Bay's the victim on a lot of other people's schedules. They're looking at it. But when Green Bay looks at their schedule as a whole, that's a pretty darn easy schedule, and hopefully something they can find a way to navigate this upcoming year. Number 7 is offensive tackle depth. I talked about Bakhtiari already, but how many teams have, in my opinion, 4 players that they can roll out and be pretty darn good offensive tackles? They got David Bakhtiari, Yosh Nijman at right tackle, and Yosh can play left tackle as well, which is amazing. Zach Tom can play left tackle or right tackle and be a starting caliber player, in my opinion. And they also have Elton Jenkins. Now, you might be thinking Elton was really bad at right tackle a season ago, and you are not wrong. However, that was coming off the torn ACL, and he immediately goes to right tackle. I think if he played out there today, I think he would be much better. The other thing is, even if right tackle doesn't work, we've seen him play at left tackle, and he did really well at left tackle. So I still think there is the ability there, if you wanted to play Elton at left tackle, especially in a pinch. But they have 4 legitimate starting tackles, in my opinion, in Bakhtiari, Elton Jenkins, Yosh Nijman, and Zach Tom. A lot of teams don't have 2. So the fact that they can roll out 4 different offensive tackles that, in my opinion, you wouldn't change the offense in any way if any of those 4 tackles were out there. Meaning you're going to run your same game plan that you would have no matter if it's Bach, Nijman, Tom, or Elton Jenkins out there at tackle. You have 4 guys that you can continue to run your offense with, that you don't have to use an extra tight end to chip or do a bunch of stuff. You can just go out there with those 4 guys in some capacity, whichever 2 that you want, and run your offense. That is a luxury in today's NFL. Not to mention, you still have some fun upside players too, in Luke Tenuta, Caleb Jones, and Rasheed Walker, who are still developing, and Royce Newman. And I know nobody wants to see Royce out at tackle again, but he also has starting caliber experience as an offensive tackle. So if that's your 5th guy, if Royce Newman is your 5th guy that you need as an offensive tackle, you are in extremely good shape at the position. So their depth at the offensive tackle position, another huge strength for Green Bay. All right, the next one are less roster-based and more organization-based. But number 8 on my list is the player personnel and NFL scouting department. I'm not talking about rookies here. I'm talking about guys that they've needed to sign for vet minimum deals, sign off of practice squads, those sort of things. Devondre Campbell, finding him at the end of free agency on a super cheap deal a couple seasons ago, and he becomes a first-team All-Pro player. Rasul Douglas, finding him off a practice squad and him becoming a legitimate, really solid starting corner in the NFL. Rick Wagner, when they found him for pennies on the dollar, and he became a solid starting tackle for them almost all of 2020. Keyshawn Nixon, the bare minimum free agent signing that he could have possibly got. No signing bonus, no nothing. Becomes a first-team All-Pro returner and what looks like is going to be now a starting slot corner for Green Bay. Rudy Ford, they bring him in at the end of the very end of the offseason or training camp, etc., right before the start of the regular season. Not only does he become a core special teams player for him, he might very well be their starting safety this year and played some real solid minutes for them at starting safety a season ago. Maybe this year it's Tavarius Moore. Maybe this year it's a Jonathan Owens. Maybe they found the next great long snapper in Matt Orzech. Who knows? But this is a player personnel department who has done a phenomenal job of scouting low-end salary talent at the NFL level and allowing them to come in and play significant roles in Green Bay and find like literal first team all pro players in Devondre Campbell and Keyshawn Nixon. That is incredible. Those guys deserve so much credit for finding those players in a variety of different ways. They've been, outside the box thinkers when it comes to that stuff and which guys that they've signed, but they have hit more often than not. And that should be something where Green Bay has a little bit more challenges still coming up with some of the free agents, money that they have to spend, some of the salary cap issues. If that can continue to be something where they continue to find those cheap, talented players, that will continue to serve Green Bay very well moving forward. Number 9 is something that I think a lot of people take for granted, and that's cash on hand. And Green Bay, with all of their Titletown district and just the way that they're set up as a franchise, has great financial maneuverability, has a ton of cash on hand, has a ton set up in, savings accounts and stuff like that. And you might think like, why do I care? Why? Like every team has the same salary cap and they're going to be able to go out and spend that money no matter what. So like, why do I care what they have in their savings account and cash on hand? I understand your thinking on that, but all of that signing bonus money that Green Bay gives out, that is all has to be cash on hand that you're paying in advance. And we have seen teams, AKA the Raiders, that have struggled with this in the past, or owners that will not want to give up a ton of money in cash on hand in advance. Green Bay has been constantly willing to do that. And that allows them to do that, where there's always money in the banana stand and borrow from future salary caps. The only way you can do that is if you have the money up front to give out massive signing bonuses that you have to pay right now so that you can spread that out over the length of the cap. So it like when it gets done, it just seems like it's so like secondhand and like, oh, of course, that's what teams do. And a lot of teams do it, but some don't. Some owners don't like it. And some like teams in the past, like the Raiders, have had cash on hand issues, especially when they moved to Vegas, that they weren't able to do some of that stuff. So the financial maneuverability and their willingness to go out and spend a lot of that money up front really sets Green Bay up for success and allows them to do some things financially and with the salary cap that some other teams just can't do based on what their structure is set up as. And then last but not least, number 10, the carry the G. The standard is the standard. The franchise is the franchise. This is the Green Bay freaking Packers. And yes, we're going through a little bit of a transition in Green Bay, but I think Green Bay has built a culture and an organization that is strong enough that even if this team goes 3-14 this year, 2-15, something crazy, Jordan Love doesn't work out, I don't think we're going to see another decade long of like the 1980s or in the 70s and however long that was, where they were just completely inept. I just don't see that as being the case. Might they have to trade out or change out maybe a GM or a coach down the road if some things don't work out? Yes, that certainly can be the case as it is with any franchise in the NFL. But I do believe the foundation of the Green Bay Packers is still very, very strong. This is a team that is bred on winning. That is all they care about is winning. And people want to talk about, well, they don't have an owner. Owners are fickle. You don't know what you're going to get with an owner. And yes, sometimes the structure with Murphy, Ball, LaFleur, Gutekunst, there could be some things that fall apart based on how that structure is set up. But overall, this is a team that everyone in the organization, from the very, very top to everyone down to the bottom, is focused on winning. And that is hugely important. And that's not the case in every major sports franchise. It is not how teams operate. Some are just trying to make money. In the NFL, you've got some just awful franchises that have no idea, no cultural foundation, no nothing. The fact that the Packers are the Packers, the fact that they have one of the strongest foundations in the NFL, the fact that they are America's team, in my opinion, Titletown USA, carry the G, whatever you want to say, there is a lot of culture that still goes into that. I believe it is still very strong, and I believe that culture will make it so that Green Bay, even in a rebuild or a reorg or whatever it is that this is, I don't think they're going to have that crazy stretch of 10, 15 years where they just go and aren't making playoffs or things like that. I think this is a very strong franchise. I think they'll continue to operate that way. And I think this, whatever it is, rebuild, etc., will be faster rather than slower. I think Green Bay is going to have some really good opportunities to get back into the playoff picture sooner rather than later, maybe as soon as this season. Those are my 10 strengths, just to recap them. The left side of the offensive line, their youth and just, sort of, I don't know. I think the youth playmaking and the overall excitement of the young players on this roster is what I will say. The edge rushers, once Rashawn Gary is healthy, the yards after catch and run after catch possibilities and playmaking with these new playmakers, Keyshawn Nixon, the strength of schedule, the offensive tackle depth, the player personnel and NFL scouting departments, the cash on hand and their financial flexibility, and then just the overall culture, the carry the G in Green Bay. Those are the 10 biggest strengths. Hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to be brought back down to earth, you can go back earlier in this week and listen to my biggest weaknesses. Hopefully it all balances itself out, but I'm still so excited about this season, so excited about this team, and can't wait to see what they put on the field in 2023. Thanks so much for joining me. I'll be right back here tomorrow, but until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.